He slammed his fist on my kitchen table, making the coffee cups jump. "Sign it now or we'll have you declared mentally incompetent." My own sister stood behind him, her arms crossed, avoiding my eyes like a coward. After 3 tours serving our country in Afghanistan, after pulling wounded soldiers from burning vehicles, after saving the life of a judge during Hurricane Katrina, they thought they could erase me with forged papers and lies. But what happened next in that courtroom would expose a conspiracy so shocking that everyone, including the judge himself, would be forced to confront the truth about who I really was. The stale air inside the county courthouse pressed against my lungs, thick with the smell of old wood polish and nervous sweat. Each step I took echoed too loudly on the marble floor, announcing my arrival to everyone waiting inside. My military uniform was long retired, hanging in a closet at home, but the discipline it had drilled into me remained etched in my spine, keeping my shoulders square and my head high despite the weight of what I was facing. At the front table, my younger sister Rachel sat with her husband Michael, their heads bent together in whispered conspiracy. Rachel wore a navy blazer that cost more than most people's rent, her hair styled perfectly, not a strand out of place. She'd always cared more about appearances than truth. Michael leaned into her, whispering something that made her lips curl into that smirk I'd seen too many times growing up. The one that said she thought she was smarter than everyone else in the room. When Rachel caught my eye, that smirk widened. She didn't just think she'd won, she was already celebrating her victory in her mind, probably planning how to spend the money from selling Dad's house. Michael studied me with the dismissive glance of someone examining damaged goods at a yard sale. To him, this hearing was merely paperwork, a formality before they seized control of my life and everything our father had spent decades building. The courtroom buzzed with barely contained anticipation. Lawyers shuffled documents with practiced efficiency, their briefcases snapping open and closed. Clerks typed steadily at their computers, recording every detail. In the gallery benches, curious locals craned their necks for a better view, whispering behind raised hands. My family's dispute had already made the local paper twice. Headlines like "Sisters Battle Over War Hero's Estate" had drawn them like vultures to roadkill. I felt their stares burning into my back, some sympathetic, others merely entertained by the promise of drama. I wasn't the kind of person who blended into crowds. Maybe it was the military bearing that years of service had carved into my bones. Maybe it was the fact that everyone knew my father, Colonel Robert Matthews, who'd served this community for 40 years. Or maybe it was because they'd all read Michael's claims in the paper, painting me as an unstable veteran who couldn't be trusted with a checkbook, let alone an estate. Either way, I knew I was being watched, judged, measured. But I didn't flinch. I'd faced Taliban fighters in Kandahar. I could handle suburban gossip. My attorney, David Chen, sat beside me, methodically arranging folders with color-coded tabs. He'd been recommended by a fellow veteran, and his calm precision reminded me of the best officers I'd served under. "Remember," he whispered, "let them talk first. They'll hang themselves with their own rope." When the bailiff, a mountain of a man with a voice like thunder, called out, "All rise," the room collectively held its breath. Judge Thomas Harrison entered through the side door, his black robe pristine, his expression carved from stone. He moved with the practiced authority of someone who'd presided over hundreds of cases, seen every type of family drama, heard every excuse and lie. But when his gaze swept the courtroom and landed on me, something extraordinary happened. He froze mid-stride. His hands, reaching for the bench, stopped in mid-air. His eyes widened behind his wire-rimmed glasses and his mouth opened slightly. The folder he carried slipped from his fingers, papers scattering across the floor. And then, in a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the silent courtroom, he said, "It's her." The atmosphere shifted like someone had sucked all the air from the room. Papers stopped rustling. Keyboards fell silent. Even the old radiator in the corner seemed to pause its constant clicking. Lawyers who'd been reviewing notes looked up sharply. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her keys. Rachel's confident smile wavered, her perfectly painted lips parting in confusion. Michael's head swiveled between the judge and me, his forehead creasing as he searched for context he didn't have. The silence wasn't respectful, it was electric, charged with unspoken questions. Everyone sensed that something significant had just occurred, something that transcended the usual family property dispute. The very air seemed to vibrate with curiosity and confusion. I kept my expression neutral, years of military training serving me well, but inside my pulse quickened like a drum roll before battle. Recognition. He remembered. 20 years ago, during the chaos of Hurricane Katrina, when New Orleans was drowning and the world was watching, I'd been deployed with my National Guard unit for rescue operations. We'd worked alongside local Guard units, pulling survivors from rooftops, wading through toxic floodwater that burned our skin, ignoring our own exhaustion because lives depended on us. On the third day, we'd responded to a distress call from a partially collapsed building where several Guard members were trapped. The structure was unstable, groaning with every gust of wind, threatening to finish its collapse at any moment. I'd gone in alone when others hesitated, navigating through twisted metal and shattered concrete. In a flooded basement, I'd found a young National Guard captain, barely conscious. His leg twisted at an impossible angle, the water rising around him. His uniform had read Harrison T. He'd been trying to save two elderly civilians who were trapped behind debris. Even injured, even drowning, he'd refused to leave them. I'd managed to break through the debris with my tactical knife and a piece of rebar, created an air pocket for the civilians, then dragged Harrison out first because his injuries were most severe. By the time I got him to safety, he was unconscious, his pulse weak. The medics said another 5 minutes and he would have drowned. I went back for the elderly couple, got them out just before the building finally gave way, collapsing into the flood with a roar that still sometimes echoes in my nightmares. Harrison had tried to find me afterward, to thank me, but I'd already been redeployed. He'd left messages at my unit that I'd never received. And now, 20 years later, he was Judge Thomas Harrison presiding over my case. And he'd just recognized the woman who'd saved his life. Neither Rachel nor Michael had anticipated this. They couldn't have known. It wasn't in any record they could access, wasn't something they could plan for or manipulate. The universe had just dealt a card they didn't even know was in the deck. Judge Harrison recovered with visible effort, bending to gather his scattered papers. The bailiff rushed to help, but the judge waved him off, taking his time, using the moment to compose himself. When he finally straightened and took his seat, his face had returned to its professional mask, but his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his glasses. "Be seated," he commanded, his voice steady but carrying an undertone that hadn't been there before. The courtroom obeyed, but the atmosphere remained charged. People leaned forward in their seats, sensing that whatever was about to unfold would be far from ordinary. Rachel leaned urgently toward Michael, whispering rapidly. Her fingers twisted the edge of her legal pad, leaving tiny tears in the paper. Michael's jaw tightened as he whispered back, his face flushing red. Their lawyer, an older man named Peterson who'd probably promised them an easy victory, looked suddenly uncertain, his eyes darting between the judge and his clients. I didn't need to hear their whispered conversation. Their body language screamed what their words couldn't. They were rattled. The script they'd rehearsed, the outcome they'd assumed was guaranteed, had just encountered an unexpected variable. In combat, we called it a battlefield shift, that moment when the enemy realizes their intel was wrong, their position compromised. My attorney David noticed too. He made a small note in the margin of his legal pad, his expression unchanged but his eyes sharp with interest. "Steady," he murmured to me. "This changes things, but we stick to the plan." The clerk, a thin woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, began reading the case information in a monotone voice. Matthews versus Matthews, case number 2024, CV 0892. The matter of the estate of Colonel Robert Matthews, deceased, and the question of trustee competence. The sound of our family name bouncing off the courtroom walls felt heavier than it should have. Like each echo carried the weight of all the years that had led to this moment. Dad's name, spoken in this sterile legal context, felt like a violation of his memory. He would have hated this. His daughters fighting over his legacy like dogs over a bone. People in the gallery whispered more urgently now, piecing together the drama. Family disputes over money and property always drew crowds eager for entertainment, and ours promised to deliver. An unstable veteran, a greedy sister, a suspicious brother-in-law, and now a judge with some mysterious connection to the defendant. It was better than anything on daytime television. "Is counsel ready to proceed?" Judge Harrison asked, his eyes carefully avoiding mine now, focused on the papers before him. "Yes, Your Honor," both attorneys responded in unison. Rachel's lawyer Peterson stood first. He buttoned his suit jacket with practiced flair, cleared his throat, and began painting his picture with smooth, rehearsed words. "Your Honor, This is fundamentally a matter of responsibility and care. My clients, Rachel and Michael Hayes, come before this court with heavy hearts, concerned for the welfare of Linda Matthews and the preservation of the estate left by her late father. He paused for effect, letting his words settle like sediment in water. Miss Matthews, while certainly deserving of our respect and gratitude for her military service, has unfortunately suffered significant psychological trauma as a result of that service. Post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, chronic pain from combat injuries. These are serious conditions that affect judgment and decision-making capacity. Each word felt like a carefully placed cut, designed to bleed me slowly. The lawyer continued, his voice taking on a tone of false concern. The evidence will show that Miss Matthews has exhibited erratic behavior, social isolation, and an inability to maintain stable employment since her discharge. She's had multiple emergency room visits, documented struggles with anxiety and depression, and has repeatedly refused help from family members who only want what's best for her. I forced myself to remain still, to not react to the twisting of truth into weapon. Yes, I'd been to the emergency room for a back injury from helping a neighbor move furniture. Yes, I struggled with anxiety, what combat veteran didn't. But they were painting these normal challenges as evidence of incompetence. Michael nodded along to every word, his expression arranged into what he probably thought looked like concern, but came across as smugness. He'd worn his best suit, the one I'd seen him wear to Dad's funeral, playing the role of the worried brother-in-law. Rachel kept her eyes forward, but every few seconds, she'd steal a glance at me, and in those moments I saw something beyond greed. I saw years of resentment, of feeling overlooked, of believing Dad loved me more. Furthermore, Peterson continued, warming to his theme, there have been concerning incidents. A recent car accident, altercations with neighbors, reports of confusion and memory issues. The family has tried repeatedly to help, to provide support and assistance. But Miss Matthews has responded with hostility and paranoia, lies wrapped in half-truths, the most dangerous kind. The car accident had been a minor fender bender in a parking lot, entirely the other driver's fault according to the police report. The altercation with a neighbor had been me asking them to keep their music down at 2 a.m. The memory issues? I'd once forgotten to return Rachel's call. Once. My clients don't take this action lightly, Peterson said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. They've agonized over this decision. But when they discovered that Miss Matthews was being targeted by scammers, that she'd nearly fallen for multiple fraudulent schemes, they knew they had to act. The estate that Colonel Matthews worked his entire life to build is at risk. The family home with its precious memories is being neglected. Bills are going unpaid. This is not about money, Your Honor. This is about protecting a vulnerable family member and preserving a father's legacy. When Peterson finally sat down, the courtroom felt heavier, as if his lies had added physical weight to the air. Some people in the gallery were nodding, buying into his performance. Others looked skeptical. Judge Harrison's expression remained unreadable, but I noticed his pen moving across his legal pad in sharp, aggressive strokes. David stood slowly, deliberately, like a sniper taking position. He buttoned his jacket, took a measured breath, and began our counterattack. Your Honor, what we've just heard is a masterful work of fiction, professionally delivered and utterly devoid of truth. The directness of his opening caused a small gasp from the gallery. Rachel's mouth opened in shock. Michael's face darkened. We will present evidence, David continued, his voice clear and strong, that not only disproves these malicious claims, but reveals something far more sinister. This is not a case of concerned family members trying to help a struggling veteran. This is a calculated attempt at fraud, forgery, and theft, orchestrated by Michael Hayes and enabled by Rachel Hayes, to steal an inheritance they have no legal right to. Peterson jumped to his feet. Objection, Your Honor, that's inflammatory, and... You opened the door with your characterization of my client, David shot back. I'm simply walking through it. Judge Harrison raised a hand. Objection overruled. Continue, Counselor, but keep it professional. David nodded. The evidence will show that Linda Matthews is not only competent, but exceptionally capable. She manages her own finances meticulously, maintains the family property beautifully, and has never fallen for any scam. What she has done is refuse to sign over her rightful inheritance to people who believe they're entitled to it simply because they want it. The evidence will also show, David continued, his voice gaining strength, that the defendants have engaged in a pattern of harassment, intimidation, and ultimately criminal fraud in their attempts to seize control of Colonel Matthews' estate. We have recordings of threats. We have forged documents. We have proof of trespassing and attempted coercion. This case isn't about protecting Linda Matthews. It's about stopping predators from stealing what isn't theirs. Michael's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping. Rachel had gone pale beneath her makeup. Their lawyer was scribbling notes frantically, probably trying to figure out how much we actually had on them. And through it all, Judge Harrison watched with an intensity that seemed to pierce through the legal maneuvering to something deeper. When our eyes met briefly, I saw something that gave me hope. Recognition not just of who I was, but of the injustice being attempted in his courtroom. The opening statements concluded, and Judge Harrison called for a brief recess. As people filed out, chattering excitedly about what they'd witnessed, I remained seated. The battle was joined, but the war was far from over. During the recess, I stood in the courthouse hallway, ignoring the clusters of people who whispered and pointed. David had stepped outside to make a phone call, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The marble walls felt like they were closing in, each echo of footsteps another reminder of how public this private pain had become. Linda. I turned to find Rachel approaching, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. She'd retouched her makeup, but I could see the cracks in her armor. Up close, without Michael hovering, she looked younger, more like the sister who used to sneak into my room during thunderstorms. "We need to talk," she said, glancing around to make sure we weren't being overheard. "Your lawyer advised against that, I'm sure," I replied evenly. "Screw what he advised." Her voice cracked slightly. "This has gone too far." "You think?" I couldn't keep the sarcasm out of my voice. Was it too far when Michael threatened me in my own kitchen? When you tried to have me declared incompetent? Or just now, when it's not going according to plan? Her face flushed. "You don't understand. Michael's in trouble. Deep trouble. He owes people money, bad people. If we don't get access to the estate, that's not my problem, Rachel. He's my husband, and you're my sister." I shot back. "That didn't stop you from trying to destroy me." We stood there, two women who'd once shared everything, now separated by more than just the width of a courthouse hallway. I could see the girl she'd been in her eyes, frightened and desperate, but that girl had made her choices. "If you drop this now," I said quietly, "tell the truth about what Michael made you do, you might avoid criminal charges. But if you keep going, if you keep letting him use you as a weapon against me, I'll have no choice but to treat you like the enemy you've chosen to be." Before she could respond, Michael appeared, grabbing her arm roughly. "What are you doing? Get away from her." "Don't touch her like that," I said, my voice dropping to the tone that used to make privates snap to attention. He sneered at me. "Or what? You'll have a flashback? Everyone knows you're crazy, Linda. PTSD, right? Probably wake up screaming every night. Can't hold a job. Can't keep a relationship. And you think you can manage Dad's estate?" The words were meant to wound, and they did, but not in the way he expected. They clarified everything, crystallized my resolve into something diamond hard. This man, this parasite who'd attached himself to my family, thought my service, my sacrifice, made me weak. He was about to learn otherwise. "I served 3 tours in Afghanistan," I said, stepping closer to him. "I've been shot at, blown up, and left for dead. I've held dying soldiers in my arms and led missions through hell itself. You think your petty threats scare me? You think your lies matter? I've faced real enemies, Michael. You're just a con man in a cheap suit who's about to learn what happens when you attack someone who knows how to fight back." He stepped back, his bravado cracking. Rachel pulled free from his grip, looking between us with growing alarm. The bailiff appeared in the doorway. "Court's resuming." We filed back in, the tension between us thick enough to cut. As I took my seat, I noticed Judge Harrison watching our group with keen interest. He'd seen the confrontation through the glass doors, seen Michael's aggression and my response. Another piece of the puzzle falling into place. The afternoon session began with evidence, and David came out swinging. He presented my financial records, showing meticulous management of my own assets. Bank statements, investment accounts, tax returns, all perfectly maintained. Then came my medical records, not the fabricated ones Peterson had referenced, but the real ones. "As you can see, Your Honor," David explained, "Miss Matthews has been under the care of the VA's best physicians. Her PTSD is mild and well managed with therapy. Her back injury, sustained in service, is controlled with physical therapy and occasional pain medication, never exceeding prescribed amounts. There's no evidence of mental incompetence, confusion, or inability to manage her affairs. Then came the character witnesses. First, Dorothy Chen, my neighbor for 15 years, a retired school principal who commanded respect the moment she took the stand. Linda Matthews is the best neighbor anyone could ask for, she testified. She maintains her property beautifully, helps elderly neighbors with their yards, and organizes our neighborhood watch. The idea that she's incompetent is not just wrong, it's insulting. Next came Captain James Rodriguez, who'd served with me in Afghanistan. He'd driven 3 hours to testify wearing his dress uniform, his chest decorated with ribbons that made everyone in the room sit up straighter. "Ma'am," he addressed the court, "Sergeant First Class Matthews saved my life and the lives of 12 other soldiers during an ambush in Helmand Province. She maintained perfect tactical awareness while under heavy fire, coordinated our defense, and managed to get every one of us out alive. The suggestion that she can't manage civilian responsibilities is absurd. I'd trust her with my life. I have trusted her with my life." Rachel sank lower in her seat with each testimony. Michael's foot tapped nervously under the table. Their lawyer kept objecting, but the evidence was overwhelming. Then David played his trump card. "Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence of attempted fraud." He pulled out a stack of documents, copies of the papers Michael and Rachel had tried to make me sign. The forensic document examiner took the stand, a stern woman with 30 years of experience who spoke with the authority of someone who'd testified in hundreds of cases. "These signatures," she said, pointing to enlarged images on a screen, "are forgeries." "Poor ones at that." Someone attempted to replicate Colonel Matthews' signature on documents transferring property ownership. The pressure patterns are wrong, the letter formations inconsistent, and most tellingly, they used the wrong color ink. Colonel Matthews exclusively used black ink. These are in blue. But the real bombshell came when she examined the handwriting on other parts of the documents. "What's particularly interesting," she continued, "is that we have 2 different forgers here. Some signatures were attempted by Mr. Hayes, matching his handwriting samples. But others, specifically on the most recent documents, match samples from Ms. Rachel Hayes." The courtroom erupted. Rachel's face crumbled, tears streaming down her cheeks. Michael turned to her, his face twisted in fury, and hissed something that made her flinch. "Order!" Judge Harrison's gavel rang out. "We'll have order!" When the room settled, David continued methodically. He presented the police reports from Michael's trespassing incidents, the restraining order I'd filed, the cease and desist letters he'd ignored. Then came the recordings I'd made of his threats, played for the entire courtroom to hear. Michael's voice filled the room. "Sign it now or we'll destroy you. I've got friends who'll testify you're crazy. We'll have you committed if we have to. This house, this money, it's ours. Your dad wanted Rachel to have it, not his damaged daughter." Even Peterson, their lawyer, looked shocked. He'd clearly had no idea about the recordings or the extent of Michael's behavior. He kept shooting glances at his clients, probably wondering what else they hadn't told him. Judge Harrison called another recess. As people filed out, 2 uniformed police officers entered, approaching the prosecutor who'd been observing from the gallery. The criminal investigation was already beginning. In the hallway, Michael confronted Peterson, voices raised. "You said this would be easy. You said she had no case." "You didn't tell me about forged documents," Peterson snapped back. "Or threats. Or recordings. I'm done. Find yourself new counsel for the criminal charges you're about to face." He walked away, leaving Michael and Rachel standing alone in the hallway. Rachel was sobbing now, mascara running down her cheeks, the perfect image she'd cultivated in ruins. Back in session, Judge Harrison addressed the courtroom with barely contained anger. This court has seen many cases of family disputes over estates. Most are sad but understandable differences of opinion. This is not that. This is a calculated attempt to use the legal system as a weapon against someone who has served our country with distinction. He looked directly at Michael and Rachel. The evidence presented shows clear patterns of fraud, forgery, harassment, and attempted theft. These are criminal matters that will be referred to the district attorney's office immediately. Then he turned to me, and for a moment his professional mask slipped. "Miss Matthews, this court recognizes the validity of the trust established by your father. You are confirmed as sole trustee with full authority over the estate. Furthermore, this court recommends expedited processing of criminal charges against both defendants." Michael erupted from his chair. "This is rigged. You know her. This whole thing is a setup." The bailiffs moved quickly, restraining him as he continued shouting about conspiracies and unfairness. As they dragged him toward the door, he screamed at Rachel, "This is your fault! You couldn't even forge a signature right." Rachel remained seated, shoulders shaking with sobs. When the room finally quieted, she looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. He convinced me you were the enemy. He said Dad was wrong to trust you, that you were broken, that we deserved more. I was so angry about being excluded from the trust. I let that anger turn into something ugly. You chose to forge those documents," I said quietly. "No one made you do that." "I know," she said, wiping her eyes. "I know, and I'll face the consequences. I'll cooperate with the prosecutors. I'll tell them everything. It's the least I can do." Judge Harrison's final statement rang through the courtroom. "This case is concluded. The trust stands as written. Criminal referrals will be processed immediately. Court is adjourned." The gavel came down with finality, and just like that, it was over. But as people began filing out, Judge Harrison called out, "Miss Matthews, a word, please." I approached the bench as the courtroom emptied. He removed his glasses, rubbing his eyes tiredly. "I should have recused myself the moment I recognized you," he said quietly. "But I needed to see this through to make sure justice was done. You saved my life in New Orleans. I was that scared young captain you pulled from the flood. I've never forgotten. I've spent 20 years trying to live up to the second chance you gave me." "You don't owe me anything, Your Honor," I said. "No, but I owe the truth its day in court. And today, truth won." He paused, then added, "Your father would be proud. You stood your ground, gathered evidence, and let justice take its course. That takes a different kind of courage than combat, but it's courage nonetheless." 6 months later, I stood in the conference room of the district attorney's office, watching through glass as Michael was led away in handcuffs. He'd been sentenced to 5 years for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. His tough guy act had crumbled completely during the trial, and he'd tried unsuccessfully to blame everything on Rachel. Rachel had pled guilty to lesser charges and received 2 years probation with community service. Her cooperation with prosecutors had been complete and genuine. She'd filed for divorce from Michael while he was awaiting trial, and had started seeing a therapist to understand how she'd let herself be manipulated so thoroughly. She was waiting for me outside the courthouse, looking smaller and humbler than I'd ever seen her. "Linda," she called out as I passed. I stopped but didn't approach. We'd had several conversations over the months, each one difficult but necessary. "I started therapy," she said. "The therapist says I have issues with feeling inferior, with needing external validation. She says that's why Michael could manipulate me so easily. I'm working on it." "Good," I said simply. "I know I can't undo what I did," she continued, "but I want you to know that I'm going to spend whatever time it takes to make amends. Not just to you, but to Dad's memory. I dishonored everything he taught us. Dad would want you to learn from this," I said, "to become stronger, more independent. Do that, and you'll be honoring him." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "The therapist thinks maybe someday we could work on rebuilding our relationship. If you're willing." "Maybe," I said, "but not now. Now we both need to heal." A year later, I stood at the podium for the grand opening of the Colonel Robert Matthews Veterans Center, scissors in hand, ready to cut the ribbon. The building had been purchased and renovated using funds from Dad's trust, transformed into a resource center for veterans struggling with the transition to civilian life. The crowd was larger than expected. Local politicians, VA representatives, members of the media, and dozens of veterans had come to see what we'd built. On the walls inside were photos of Dad in his uniform, alongside pictures of other local veterans who'd served with distinction. Judge Harrison, now retired, stood in the front row, applauding. Captain Rodriguez had driven in again, this time bringing several members of our old unit. Dorothy Chen was there with other neighbors, beaming with pride. Even Peterson, Michael's former lawyer, had come, having donated his services to help establish the center's legal aid program, his way of making amends for his role in the earlier drama. And in the back, almost hidden behind a pillar, stood Rachel. She'd asked if she could come, promising to stay out of the way. She'd been true to her word, keeping to the shadows. But I saw her wiping tears as I spoke about Dad's vision for serving those who'd served. "My father believed in service," I said to the crowd. "Not just military service, but service to community, to family, to truth. This center will carry on that tradition. providing resources, support, and hope to veterans who've given so much and asked for so little in return. As I cut the ribbon, the crowd erupted in applause. The center was more than just a building. It was proof that truth and justice could prevail, that service and sacrifice were still valued, and that even the deepest betrayals could be transformed into something meaningful. After the ceremony, as people toured the facility, Rachel approached cautiously. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Dad would have loved this." "He would have loved seeing us standing together without fighting more," I replied. She nodded, understanding the weight of that statement. "I've been volunteering at the VA hospital," she said, "in the mental health ward. I figured if I was going to call you unstable, I should at least learn what that really means. These veterans, what they've been through, what they carry. I'm ashamed of how I used your service against you." "We all carry things," I said. "The difference is whether we let them define us or refine us." "Michael let his debts define him," she said bitterly. "I let my resentment define me." "You let your service refine you." "I see that now." We stood there in silence for a moment, watching veterans explore the center, their faces lighting up as they discovered the resources available to them. Computer labs for job training, meeting rooms for support groups, offices for counseling services. Even a small library stocked with books on everything from PTSD management to small business development. "I've been thinking about Dad a lot," Rachel said, "about why he set up the trust the way he did. It wasn't favoritism, was it? He saw something in both of us that we couldn't see ourselves." "What do you mean?" "He saw that you had the strength to protect what mattered, to stand firm when tested. And he saw that I was vulnerable to people like Michael, that I needed to learn to stand on my own before I could be trusted with anything important." She paused, then added, "The trust wasn't just about protecting the estate from Michael. It was about protecting me from myself." I looked at my sister, really looked at her for the first time in years. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by simple, practical attire. The perfect makeup had given way to a more natural look. The desperate need to impress, to be seen as successful, had faded into something quieter, more genuine. "Dad loved us both," I said. "He just knew we needed different things." I needed purpose after the military. "You needed to find your own strength." "I'm trying," she said. "Every day I'm trying." That evening, after everyone had gone, I stood alone in Dad's office, which we'd recreated in the center as a memorial. His desk, his books, his photos, all arranged exactly as they'd been in life. On the wall hung his favorite quote, framed in simple black, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it." I pulled out his letter, the one I'd found in the locked box, and read it one more time. "Linda, you've carried weight most people never could. I saw it in your service, in your return, and in the way you protect what matters. Sophia has always struggled, always let others steer her. I hoped she'd find strength on her own. But if she doesn't, don't let her weakness destroy what I built. This house, this trust, it's yours to protect. Not just for you, but for what it represents. Don't let anyone take that away. Love, Dad." But there had been a second page I'd never shared with anyone. One that explained even more. If you're reading this, it means the trust has been challenged. Probably by Sophia and whoever she's let into her life. I want you to know that I don't blame her. She's not weak, she's just lost. The trust isn't punishment for her, it's protection. When she's ready, when she's found herself, you'll know what to do. Until then, stand firm. The storm will pass and maybe, just maybe, you'll both be stronger for weathering it. Trust your instincts, trust the law, and trust that love, even tested love, can survive. I folded the letter carefully, tucking it back into my pocket. Dad had seen all of this coming, had planned for it, had trusted me not just to protect the estate, but to eventually help Rachel find her way back. The next 5 years passed with their own rhythm. The Veterans Centre grew, helping hundreds of veterans find jobs, homes and hope. I became a regular speaker at military transition workshops, sharing not just combat stories, but the harder story of fighting my own family and winning without destroying them. Rachel completed her probation early. Her community service hours doubled voluntarily. She went back to school, getting a degree in social work, and eventually took a job at the Veterans Centre, running our family support program. It was her idea to create workshops for military families dealing with reintegration, using her own story as a cautionary tale about how isolation and resentment could poison relationships. Michael served 3 years of his 5-year sentence before being released on parole. He tried contacting Rachel once, but she'd obtained a restraining order. The last anyone heard, he'd left the state, working construction somewhere in Nevada. The man who'd thought himself so clever had been reduced to irrelevance, a footnote in our family's story. On the 5th anniversary of the Veterans Center opening, we held a gala fundraiser. Judge Harrison, now fully retired, served as honorary chairman. The event raised enough money to expand our services to include a transitional housing program for homeless veterans. During the gala, Rachel gave a speech that surprised everyone, including me. 5 years ago, I stood in a courtroom trying to destroy my sister, a woman who had served our country with honor, who had saved lives, who had earned every accolade and respect. I let greed and resentment blind me to the truth that strength isn't about taking from others. It's about building something lasting. Linda could have destroyed me completely after what I did. Instead, she gave me the chance to rebuild myself. This center isn't just about serving veterans, it's about redemption, second chances, and the power of choosing hope over bitterness. The room erupted in applause. I stood in the back watching my sister own her story, her mistakes and her growth. Dad would have been proud, not of where we started, but of where we'd arrived. Later that evening, as the gala wound down, Rachel and I stood on the center's balcony looking out over the city lights. "Do you think Dad knew it would end up like this?" she asked. "I think he hoped," I replied. "He knew the trust would protect the estate, but more importantly, he knew it would force us to face who we really were." "Michael never understood that," she said. "He thought it was all about money." "People like Michael always think it's about money," I said. "They can't understand that for people like Dad, like us, it's about something bigger. Legacy, honor, family, even when family disappoints you." "Especially then," Rachel corrected. "That's when family matters most, when it's hardest to love them." We stood in comfortable silence, two sisters who had been through hell and emerged, not unscathed but unbroken. The trust that had divided us had ultimately brought us back together, stronger and wiser than before. A young veteran approached, hesitant and nervous. "Ms. Matthews, both of you. I just wanted to thank you. This center saved my life. I was homeless, dealing with PTSD, couldn't hold a job. The programs here, the support, it gave me hope when I had none." "What's your name, soldier?" I asked. "Specialist Thompson, ma'am. Army 2 tours in Iraq." "Well, Specialist Thompson," Rachel said, "you saved yourself. We just provided the tools." He smiled, saluted, and walked away. Rachel and I watched him go, then looked at each other with understanding. This was what Dad had envisioned. Not just preservation of wealth, but transformation of pain into purpose. The phone rang in my office the next morning. It was an attorney from another state, dealing with a similar case of family members trying to declare a veteran incompetent to seize their assets. They'd heard about our case, read the court transcripts, and wanted advice. "The most important thing," I told them, "is documentation. Record everything. Every threat, every lie, every attempt at manipulation. The law is on your side if you can prove the truth." After the call, I realized our story had become more than just our story. It had become a template, a guide for other veterans facing similar betrayals. The Veterans Center started a legal aid program specifically for estate disputes, staffed by volunteer attorneys who understood both military service and family law. One afternoon, while reviewing applications for our new housing program, I found a familiar name, Michael Hayes. He was applying for emergency assistance, claiming veteran status. I pulled his file. He had indeed served briefly in the National Guard 20 years ago, discharged after 6 months for failure to adapt. It was barely service, but it was service. I showed the application to Rachel. She read it, her face cycling through anger, disgust, and finally resignation. "What do you want to do?" I asked. "What would Dad do?" she countered. We both knew the answer. Dad would evaluate based on need, not personal history. He'd say that mercy meant treating even your enemies with dignity, especially when they'd fallen so far. "Process it like any other application," Rachel said finally. "But I'll recuse myself from any involvement." "I can't, Linda. I just can't." I understood. Michael was approved for temporary assistance, never knowing that the program he benefited from was run by the women he'd tried to destroy. He completed the program, found work, and moved on, never attempting contact. Sometimes mercy means letting someone disappear into their own life, giving them the chance to become someone better without requiring them to apologize for who they were. 10 years after that first courtroom confrontation, I stood in that same courthouse, but this time as a witness in someone else's case. Another family trying to declare a veteran incompetent. Another attempted theft disguised as concern. But this time there was precedent. Our case had become Matthews Verve. Matthews, cited in legal textbooks as a landmark case for protecting veterans from financial exploitation. Judge Harrison had been replaced by Judge Sarah Coleman, a veteran herself who'd lost her leg in Iraq. She knew the real cost of service, the actual face of PTSD, the difference between struggle and incompetence. The would-be thieves didn't stand a chance. After testifying, I walked through the courthouse halls, remembering that day when everything had seemed lost. When Michael and Rachel had seemed so confident in their victory. The building hadn't changed much, but everything else had. Rachel now ran 3 veteran centers across the state. I had completed law school myself, specializing in veteran advocacy and estate protection. The foundation Dad had left wasn't just preserved, it had multiplied, spreading out like roots from a strong tree. In my office that evening, I pulled out Dad's old service photo, the one where he stood young and proud in his dress uniform. Next to it sat a newer photo, Rachel and me at the latest Veterans Center opening, standing together, both of us wearing shirts with Dad's quote about courage. The phone rang. It was Rachel. "I've been thinking," she said without preamble. "We should write about it, all of it. The good, the bad, the ugly truth of what family can do to each other and how to survive it." "Who would want to read that?" I asked. "Other families going through the same thing. Veterans being exploited by relatives. Siblings torn apart by greed. People who need to know that betrayal doesn't have to be the end of the story." She was right, of course. Our story wasn't unique in its broad strokes, only in its details. Families had been destroying themselves over inheritance since inheritance existed. But maybe our journey from destruction to rebuilding could help others find their way. We spent the next year writing together, sitting at the same kitchen table where Michael had once slammed his fist and demanded I sign my life away. We wrote about Dad's wisdom in creating the trust, about the slow poison of resentment, about Michael's manipulation and our own failings. We wrote about the courthouse confrontation, the criminal trials, the long road to forgiveness. The book, titled Standing Guard, A Family's War and Redemption, became more than we'd expected. It wasn't just our story, it became a gathering point for similar stories. Veterans wrote to share their experiences. Families reached out for advice. Law schools used it as a case study in estate protection and elder abuse prevention. At the book launch, held at the original Veterans Center, the room was packed. Judge Harrison, now in his 80s, gave the opening remarks. 25 years ago, a young soldier pulled me from floodwaters in New Orleans, saving my life. Years later, she stood in my courtroom, fighting for her father's legacy against those who would steal it. What struck me most wasn't her courage, though that was remarkable. It was her restraint. She had every right to destroy those who'd betrayed her. Instead, she chose justice over revenge, law over vengeance, and ultimately redemption over retribution. This book isn't just about surviving family betrayal. It's about transcending it. As he spoke, I looked across the room at Rachel. She was crying but smiling through the tears. We'd come so far from that horrible day when she'd stood with Michael against me. The journey had been painful, sometimes seemingly impossible, but we'd made it. During the question and answer session, a young woman stood up. "My brother is trying to have me declared incompetent to take my disability benefits. I'm a Marine, injured in Syria. What advice do you have?" Rachel and I looked at each other, then Rachel stood to answer. "Document everything. Record if your state allows it. Get legal help immediately, don't wait. But most importantly, remember that you're not alone. The same strength that got you through combat will get you through this. And sometimes," she paused, looking at me, "the people who betray you can eventually become your strongest supporters. But only if you survive their betrayal with your integrity intact." After the event, as we signed books and talked with attendees, I noticed a familiar figure in the corner. Michael, much older now, greyer, thinner, stood holding a copy of our book. He didn't approach, didn't try to make contact, just stood there reading the dedication. To Colonel Robert Matthews, who saw the storm coming and prepared his daughters to weather it, apart and together. And to all the veterans who've faced battles both foreign and domestic, may you find justice, peace, and the strength to transform pain into purpose. He set the book down, unsigned, and left quietly. Rachel saw him too, but said nothing. Some wounds heal completely, others leave scars. and some simply teach you to live with a certain kind of pain. Michael was all three for us, a reminder of how far we'd fallen and how high we'd climbed. That night, Rachel and I sat in Dad's house, my house, our house in a way, sharing a bottle of wine and looking through old photo albums. Pictures of us as children, before the resentment, before the competition, before Michael's poison. Pictures of Dad, young and strong, then older but still strong, always strong. "Do you think we've honored him?" Rachel asked. "I think we've done something better," I said. "We've proven him right. He knew the trust would save the estate, but more than that, he knew it would eventually save us." "Save me, you mean?" Rachel corrected. "You didn't need saving. We all need saving sometimes," I said. "I needed saving from my anger, from the temptation to destroy you completely when I had the chance. The trust saved me from becoming someone Dad wouldn't recognize." We sat in comfortable silence, two sisters who had traveled through hell to find each other again. Outside, the city hummed with life, families living their own dramas, their own betrayals and redemptions. But inside Dad's house, inside the sanctuary he'd protected through law and love, we were finally at peace. The story could have ended there, with reconciliation and redemption neatly wrapped. But life doesn't stop for neat endings. 3 years later, Rachel was diagnosed with breast cancer, aggressive and advanced. The diagnosis came just weeks after we'd opened our 5th Veterans Center. A moment that should have been pure celebration turned bittersweet. "I need you to take over my responsibilities at the centers," she said from her hospital bed after her first surgery. "Just temporarily, while I fight this." "You're going to beat this," I said, though the words felt hollow against the reality of her diagnosis. "Maybe," she said. "But if I don't, I need to know the work continues. The veterans, the families, they need what we've built." She fought for 18 months, with the same determination she'd once used to fight against me. Chemotherapy, radiation, experimental treatments. She tried everything. I moved into her apartment to help with her care. The sister who'd once tried to destroy me now dependent on me for basic needs. During one particularly bad night, when the pain was overwhelming and the medication wasn't enough, she grabbed my hand. "I need to tell you something," she said. "About the forgeries, about what Michael made me do. Rachel, we've been through this. It's forgiven." "No, you don't understand. There's more." She struggled to sit up. "Michael didn't just want the house. He had buyers already lined up, developers who wanted to tear it down and build condos. He'd already taken money from them, deposits he couldn't return. That's why he was so desperate. He wasn't just in debt, he'd already sold something that wasn't his. The revelation shouldn't have mattered anymore, but it did. It explained the urgency, the escalation, the willingness to destroy family bonds for money. He told me if we didn't get the house, they'd hurt him. Maybe hurt me too. I was terrified, Linda. That's not an excuse, but I was so scared. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you go to the police?" "Because I was ashamed. Because I'd chosen him over you. And by the time I realized what he really was, I was in too deep. The forgeries, the lies, I did them because I thought I was protecting us both. But really, I was just protecting him and destroying us." I held her hand tighter. "It doesn't matter now." "It does," she insisted. "Because you need to know that under all that anger and resentment, I never stopped loving you. I just lost sight of it, buried it under Michael's poison and my own jealousy. But it was always there." She died 2 weeks later, surrounded by veterans whose lives she'd helped rebuild, by colleagues from the centers, and by me. Her last words were, "Tell them I served too, in the end." At her funeral, hundreds came to pay respects. Veterans she'd helped, families she'd counseled, donors she'd charmed into supporting our cause. Judge Harrison, now needing a walker but still sharp, gave a eulogy that captured her journey. Rachel Matthews Hayes took the long road to honor, but she arrived there nonetheless. She transformed her greatest failure into her greatest service, turned her shame into purpose, and proved that redemption isn't just possible, it's powerful. She served not in uniform but in dedication to those who wore it. She earned her place among heroes not through perfection but through the courage to change. I buried her next to Dad, their headstones side by side, both marking lives of service, though they'd taken very different paths to get there. The work continued. The Veterans Centers expanded, now carrying both their names, the Colonel Robert and Rachel Matthews Veterans Foundation. I ran it alone for a while, then brought in a team of veterans and social workers who understood the mission. The legal aid program became a model replicated nationwide. protecting vulnerable veterans from financial exploitation. 5 years after Rachel's death, I received a letter forwarded through our publisher. It was from Michael, postmarked from Oregon. I almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won. Linda, I know I have no right to contact you, no right to anything from you. I've read your book, followed the news about the centers, seen what you and Rachel built. I'm writing not to ask for forgiveness, which I don't deserve, but to tell you something Rachel never knew. The men I owed money to came after me in prison. I survived barely. When I got out, I had nothing and no one, which was justice. But I also had time to think, really think, about what I'd done. I destroyed the only real family I ever had for money that wouldn't have saved me anyway. I work construction now, honest work. I volunteer at a local shelter, trying to give back something to make up for all I took. I know it will never be enough, but I wanted you to know that Rachel's death changed me. Knowing she died serving others after I'd corrupted her into serving my greed, it broke something in me that needed breaking. I won't contact you again. I just needed you to know that the man who tried to destroy you doesn't exist anymore. He died in a prison cell, beaten and alone, and what emerged was someone trying to be better. Not good, maybe never good, but better. The centers you've built are Rachel's true memorial. Every veteran helped is proof that she overcame what I turned her into. I'm sorry, Linda. For all of it. Michael. I read the letter 3 times, then filed it away. I didn't respond. Some bridges once burned shouldn't be rebuilt. But knowing that even Michael had found some measure of redemption, that the poison he'd spread had finally run its course, brought an unexpected peace. On the 20th anniversary of Dad's death, I stood in the original house, now converted into a museum and education center for the foundation. The walls that had witnessed our family's destruction and rebuilding now held photos of hundreds of veterans who'd been helped. Families reunited, lives saved. In Dad's study, preserved exactly as he'd left it, I found myself talking to his portrait. You saw it all coming, didn't you? The betrayal, the fight, but also the redemption. You knew the trust would force us to face our demons. You knew Rachel would eventually find her strength, even if it came through failure first. You knew I'd need something to fight for after the army. You orchestrated all of this, you brilliant, manipulative old soldier. The portrait, of course, didn't answer. But I could almost hear his voice, gruff and warm. I gave you the tools, Linda. You and Rachel decided how to use them. A knock on the door interrupted my reverie. A young woman entered, wearing army combat uniform, her arm in a sling. Ma'am, I'm Sergeant Jennifer Thompson. I wanted to thank you personally. Your foundation helped me when my own brother tried to take my combat pay while I was deployed. The legal aid program, it saved me from losing everything. It's what we do, I said simply. No, ma'am, it's more than that. You showed me that family betraying you doesn't mean you're weak. It means they're weak, and you can still be strong. Your story, Rachel's story, it gave me hope that maybe my brother and I can find our way back to each other someday. Maybe you can, I said. But first, protect yourself. Document everything. Don't let hope cloud your judgment. Redemption is possible, but it requires the person who hurt you to do the hard work of changing. You can't do it for them. She nodded, saluted, and left. Another soldier protected, another family's potential destruction prevented. Dad would have been proud. That evening, as I locked up the house-turned-museum, I stood on the porch where this had all begun, where Michael and Rachel had first come with their contracts and threats. The wooden boards still creaked in the same spot, a sound that had once meant danger approaching, but now just reminded me of permanence, of survival. The porch light illuminated a small plaque we'd installed. This house stood witness to betrayal and redemption, to family broken and rebuilt. May all who enter find the strength to protect what matters and the wisdom to forgive what's past. I thought about the journey from that first threatening visit to this moment. The lawsuits, the criminal trials, the slow rebuilding of trust, Rachel's transformation and ultimate sacrifice, Michael's letter from his own kind of exile. It had been a war fought in courtrooms and hospital rooms with words and legal documents instead of bullets and bombs. But like all wars, it had ended not with destruction but with rebuilding. The Veterans Centers stood as monuments not to our family's conflict, but to our reconciliation. Every veteran helped was a small victory over the greed and betrayal that had nearly destroyed us. The moon rose full and bright over the city, the same moon that had witnessed our childhood, our father's death, our civil war, and our eventual peace. Time had transformed sharp pain into dull memory. had turned enemies back into family even if imperfectly. I drove home to my own small apartment near the main Veterans Centre. The Matthews family home would always be the museum now, a teaching tool, a reminder. But home was wherever the work continued, wherever veterans found help, wherever families learned to choose love over money, forgiveness over vengeance. On my desk sat 3 photos, Dad in uniform, young and invincible. Rachel at the ribbon cutting for her first Veterans Centre, radiant with purpose and one from our childhood. 2 sisters laughing at something long forgotten before money and resentment poisoned the well. That's the photo I looked at most often, the reminder of what we'd been before we became enemies, and what we'd fought to become again family. Flawed, complicated, scarred, but family nonetheless. The phone rang. Another veteran needing help, another family in crisis. Another chance to transform pain into purpose. I answered it, ready to fight the good fight. The one Dad had prepared me for without my knowing. The one Rachel had joined in the end. The one that would continue long after I was gone. Because that's what family legacies really are, not money or property, but the strength to stand when everything tries to knock you down. The wisdom to know when to fight and when to forgive. And the courage to transform the worst betrayals into the foundation for something better. Dad had known that. He'd built it into the trust, into his plans, into us. And in the end, despite everything Michael had done to destroy it, despite our own failures and betrayals, Dad's true legacy had survived and thrived. The veteran on the phone was crying, talking about siblings trying to steal her disability payments. I listened, took notes, and assured her she wasn't alone. The Matthews family had been through this war and survived. Now it was our turn to help others survive theirs. Come to the centre tomorrow, I told her. Bring any documentation you have. We'll help you fight this and we'll win. How can you be so sure? She asked through tears. Because I've been where you are, I said. And I'm still standing. More than that, the sister who betrayed me died fighting for veterans like you. If we could find redemption, anyone can. But first we protect you. Then we pursue justice. And maybe eventually we find peace. After the call, I sat in the quiet of my office, surrounded by the work of 20 years, the evidence of a family's journey from destruction to purpose. Somewhere, Michael was laying bricks or hammering nails, trying to build something honest for once. Somewhere, Rachel rested beside Dad, their conflicts finally silenced. And here I sat, the last Matthews standing, carrying on the work they'd all, in their own ways, contributed to. The phone rang again. Another crisis, another opportunity to help. I answered it with the same words I'd used thousands of times. Matthews Veterans Foundation, Linda speaking. How can we help you stand guard? Because that's what we do. We stand guard against those who would prey on veterans, against family members who let greed overcome love, against a system that sometimes forgets those who served it. We stand guard because Dad taught us to, because Rachel learned to, because even Michael, in his broken way, finally understood its importance. And we'll keep standing guard until the last veteran is safe. The last predatory family member is stopped. The last betrayal is transformed into purpose. That's the Matthews legacy now, not just a house or a trust, but an unbreakable commitment to protecting those who protected us. The story that began with betrayal had become one of redemption. The family that greed had torn apart had been rebuilt into something larger, stronger, more meaningful than any of us could have imagined. And somewhere I'm certain Dad was watching, nodding with approval, knowing his plan had worked exactly as he'd intended. Not the plan to preserve wealth, but the plan to preserve his daughters, to force us through fire so we could emerge stronger, to use our conflict as the forge for something unbreakable. He'd known one of us would fall and the other would catch her. He'd known betrayal would become redemption, that destruction would become construction, that the end would really be a beginning. Standing guard. That's what soldiers do. That's what families should do. That's what we finally learned to do after all the battles were fought and the dust had settled. We learned to stand guard for each other, even when we'd been enemies, especially then. The phone kept ringing. The work continued. The legacy lived on. And somewhere in the night, 2 sisters who'd once tried to destroy each other stood guard together over those who needed protection, united at last in purpose if not in presence, proving that even the deepest wounds can heal, even the worst enemies can become allies, and even the most broken families can find their way home.